Hello, welcome to Asia in Review at ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Hong Jiang, Associate Professor of Geography at UH Manoa. And today with me is my guest, Brenda Foster. And we'll be talking about daily living in China. Let me give you a brief intro of Brenda. Brenda served as the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai between 2005 and July of this year. And this is the largest American chamber in the Asian Pacific region. And Brenda was responsible to oversee all of the chamber's initiatives and represent the chamber and American businesses in China, the US, and the Asian Pacific region. And you can imagine she had just so much of experience working and living in China. And Brenda, so great to have you here and welcome.
Thank you, Hong. I'm delighted to be able to be here, and especially to be back home in Hawaii.
So talking about coming back home, you have the blue skies and clean water, and just wonder, is that a reverse cultural shock?
In some ways, yes. But there are beautiful spots in China that actually still really have blue sky and good water, but they tend to be further out west and in the mountain areas. But generally speaking, China has great challenges in terms of cleaning up the pollution in its environment.
And you were in Shanghai from 2005 and this year, so 8 years.
Yes, I was in Shanghai for 8 years.
And the largest chamber, how big is the chamber? How many?
We currently have around 4,000 members.
Oh boy.
And the U.S. Chamber thinks that we're the largest American chamber abroad.
Oh, wow.
We do over 300 programs a year. Mm-hmm. We have 24 specific industry committees, and we have a large corporate social responsibility program, government advocacy program, research, and we do private roundtables, but a very, very active chamber on behalf of the American business community in China.
Wow, so basically all the members are Americans having business in China?
No, all the American members are really Americans.
Okay.
But we do have a lot of Chinese members because they work for American corporations.
I see, okay. So given your contacts and communities that you reach out in China, because today our focus is on daily living in China, I'll probably ask you those questions and what you know and how people live their lives. How many of those sub-communities do you think you kind of get to know and get in touch with in China?
I think throughout my tenure in China, and I've worked with China for over 38 years,
wow.
And so I think we have been able to touch almost all of the communities in China, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. We work with the American business community. We also worked extensively with the Chinese community in our corporate social responsibility programs. We were way out into the mountains and other provinces that were economically challenged. Mm-hmm. And then we worked with young professionals. We worked with young professionals who also worked with American companies. We do training programs with them. And then more importantly, we also worked with senior citizens, especially out in the province of Sichuan, where we partnered with U.S. corporations to build a senior citizen center we actually built a brand new one because their old one had been destroyed in the Wenchuan earthquake.
Wow, I can imagine how much work you had as the president of the chamber, dealing with all these different subset of the different communities there.
Yes.
Wow, must be really, really exciting. And I remember at the last meeting with the venture capital and also the ThinkTech Hawaii, the luncheon, you talk about the challenges, the trade-offs of being in China. Can you share with us a little bit?
Well, I think it also depends which China we're talking about.
Yeah.
But for example, if you are a person who is going to work in China and in a large city such as Shanghai, which has a population of 23 to 25 million people in the city, you have to get used to the fact that the quality of life may be different than what you might be used to in the United States. There is definitely far more traffic, pollution. Mm-hmm. There are questions on food and health safety, as you read about in the press. And you have to really be flexible and adaptable to be able, I think, to work cross-culturally, but certainly in an environment where there's days where they tell you don't go outside or breathe the air. But it's also just so dynamic and so exciting. And the eclectic group of people you meet and the challenges of everybody can do attitude in what they're doing, it makes it worthwhile.
That's great, and it really kind of a prospering business community, and you kind of excite each other.
I think so.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Have you? What are the kind of places you traveled in China?
I think I've been to almost every province in China.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately, not the province in the city that you originally came from.
That which is Harbin.
Harbin.
Very cold.
Very cold.
Yeah.
But I've certainly been throughout. Certainly in the north, in Beijing, Shanxi, Xi'an. Out in Shanxi, I've also been out, way out to Urumqi or Urumqi, as we might say in the U.S.,
right,
but the Chinese say Urumqi.
The Uyghur area.
The Uyghur area. I've been up into the base of the Tibetan mountains, also out in the southern part, Guizhou, and also in Yunnan, Sichuan, and then of course Jiangsu, Zhejiang, all of those areas up in Shandong. But pretty much throughout China. I think there's only a couple provinces that I've actually not been to.
You've traveled more than me. Well, in China, I grew up in China, but I've been in this country for over 20 years. Yeah.
Well, it's important because for the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, which we call AmCham Shanghai, we really represent American business in China. And so we may have the corporate headquarters in Shanghai, but we need to service our members wherever they are in China and all over. And clearly our partnership with the Chinese government on our corporate social responsibility programs take us really to some of the economically challenged places in China. But it's also the most rewarding for the projects and things that we do out there, especially in maternal and child health care.
I see. One thing I'm curious, as you mentioned, Urumqi and also Tibet that you traveled. In the last few years, there were some issues very, very tight in those areas. Were you able to travel freely? Were you able to talk to people freely there?
I had no problem talking to people freely and traveling freely. Anytime I've been in China, and that goes back to 1978 when I first went to China.
You're probably more adapted in China than some Chinese.
Well, it helps if you speak Chinese.
That's right.
And it also helps that the Chinese are supporting what you're doing there.
That's right.
And that you've developed a partnership to really make a difference in the community. I mean, there's still challenges, but it helps to have a partnership.
It's interesting. So you were in China first in 1978 when China just opened up. Well, not even, right?
Not even really. I was there 6 months before the United States normalized relations with China as a guest of the Chinese government, actually bringing University of Hawaii professors and high school students through the Pacific and Asian Affairs Council on a tour. And we went to Guangzhou, Hangzhou, Shanghai, Beijing. And so it was very exciting and really interesting to see the changes. So I think I have a little different perspective on China. Seen it before, it really opened up economic reform to the level they've developed to now.
There'll be so many things we can talk about, and to stick with today's topic, we deal with kind of daily living. I wanted to bring this film that I saw. In 1990, that's when China kind of started to open up, connect with the West. And there's this film called Iron and Silk, and in it, it's talking about cultural differences. This American person wanted to learn Chinese, and the Chinese teacher said, teach the American these customs, like you offer me tea, offer me cookie. But then she said, no, I don't want it. And the American was very confused. Did you just say I should offer you? And she said, but no doesn't mean no. You need to offer me again. So no means yes, yes means no. It gets very confusing. I suppose over the years, and when you over time interact with the Chinese, you see different ways that the two people are understanding each other more easily.
Well, I do think the polite refusal of 3 no's is much more classical Chinese. I don't think we see it nowadays. Certainly not.
Is there one no now?
If you say no, they take it as no.
Oh wow! Well, you'd better know what you want.
Yeah, and certainly in Shanghai they know what they want.
Okay.
But you do have to have a certain amount of humility, and you have to have a certain amount of patience. And I think the importance of establishing relationships and still saving face for people. So in other words, not so much direct confrontation, but more or less going around the situation to get an understanding. And I think that all still exists and is very important for anybody wanting to live and work in China.
So in that way, do you think over time you've knowing so much about how Chinese behave and the language and culture, are there any ways that you become a bit Chinese?
In some ways, yes. And it might be the way I will phrase a question or ask, especially government officials, a question, or maybe I will be a bit more diplomatic. And will not be perhaps as direct, not immediately. It's much more about establishing a relationship, having a discussion and getting to understand each other, and then saying, by the way, I have a problem I'm not sure how to solve.
Okay.
May I ask your advice?
Okay.
Versus saying, I have a problem, I expect you, to do this on behalf of the business community and have an answer to us by X date. We don't do that. You ask advice, you ask what would be the best approach, what might they recommend to solve the situation. And so you approach it differently. And actually, I think that really breeds a lot of civility in the relationships.
Right, yeah. Especially on the personal level, that's what people respond to and the people are used to.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't think in any relationship in any country, it's really good to just be very angry with people or go face to face. I mean, there might be certain instances one might want to do that. But generally speaking, I think you get more out of a situation and more answers and more cooperation if you're careful in your approach. Yeah. And try to have an understanding, because there may be something, and this is really true in China, there may be something culturally you really don't understand that's going on behind the scenes that you know nothing about.
That would be my next question in terms of not personal conflicts, but going behind the scene that has more to do with the behavior of the government. Have you had those kind of experience?
What's really important on my staff was primarily Chinese. And I really groomed and worked with my government affairs staff because it was very important. They could go behind the scenes, and face saving again was very important, so they could understand and talk to their counterparts at different levels in the government to find out exactly what the situation was and then how we might want to approach suggested solutions to the situation at hand.
Yeah, that's great. That's very important. So we're going to take a short break, and I'm Hong Jiang, and this is Asia in Review, and we've been talking with Brenda Foster about daily living in China. And when we come back, we'll learn more.
I'm Bill Spencer, President of the Hawaii Venture Capital Association. We do monthly luncheon programs with ThinkTech about things that matter to Hawaii entrepreneurs, investors, and business service providers. So join us on the fourth Thursday of every month at the Plaza Club. For information about upcoming events or to join our mailing list, visit hvca.org. See you there.
Hello, we're back. We're live, and this is Asia in Review, and I'm your host, Hong Jiang, and we'll be speaking with Brenda Foster, past president of American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, the largest overseas American chamber. And we were, before the break, we're talking about your experience in China, and let's get to these really daily kind of nitty-gritty kind of experiences. Let's talk about the air. You know, we hear so much about air pollution in China. That's just getting worse. Over the 8 years you were living in Shanghai, did you see it getting worse over time?
We absolutely saw it getting worse in other parts of the country. I think Shanghai actually has improved a bit. And the reason for that is a lot of the heavy industry and manufacturing were moved out to other provinces or further north and further south. And when the economy of Shanghai was becoming much more service-oriented, and because we live along the coast, we would see a little bit fresher air. Areas such as the north, Beijing, Henan, the rest, it is really serious up there. To the extent that when we would go up there, all of my staff would come back with respiratory infections.
Wow.
Or I would be in a building and I literally could not see the building across the street.
Wow.
Now, the Chinese government is very much aware of the issues of the pollution, and they're working very hard on what they need to do to restructure the economy and the industries to try to alleviate it. And they certainly have a plan, but I think they're looking out to 2030 or later before they think they're actually going to be able to do something about the pollution. But it is serious and it is real. And we all had air filters in our offices. I think I had 8 to 10 industrial air filters in my offices in Shanghai.
Did you get the filters in China or elsewhere?
They were imported into China. They were foreign filters imported into China.
Wow.
And we had some in our apartments also. But the rapid economic development has really polluted the environment, and it's affected almost every sector.
You know, after 2008, China had the Olympics in Beijing, and we thought, oh, maybe things were getting better. But Beijing was getting better for a while, and then it really went downhill again. You can really see the challenges there.
Well, part of it is, too, with the Beijing Olympics. They stopped all manufacturing in and around Beijing for about 6 months prior.
And then they started again.
And the minute they stopped all the manufacturing, the air cleared up, and it was blue sky, and Beijing does get blue sky, and it's surrounded by beautiful mountains. Shanghai, when we had the World Expo in 2010, did the same thing. And we could actually, during the 6 months that the expo was on in Shanghai, could actually see stars at night.
Wow,
and then
that's a treat.
Oh, it was a real treat. I mentioned to several key top Chinese government officials how wonderful it is, and shouldn't we just keep it this way?
That's right.
And work on that. And their attitude was, we have to develop the economy.
And how long was the star there?
It was 6 months we actually had fresh air.
Oh, wow.
And then the minute, you could tell the month after the expo, because factories and people had to go back to work. And they weren't retrofitted for air pollution devices yet. And so it's been difficult. But it depends where you are in China. If you're out even in Chongqing, Chengdu, they're also getting very bad air pollution out there, Guangzhou.
Most big cities,
Most big cities, and even smaller cities.
Wow.
It depends on what the industry is in those areas.
Wow.
But the Chinese government really understands, the people understand, and the people are getting very unhappy because it's polluting the water and the food.
Yeah, definitely. What about respiratory problems do you see among your staff and the people you interact with? They suffering from it?
Yes, when there is heavy pollution, people are having a hard time breathing. There are respiratory problems. And I will tell you, from the pollution in the environment, my daughter, who is a pediatric oncologist, in other words, she works with children with cancer, did a rotation out in Shanghai, and she was saying of the children she saw and the statistics she saw, about 85% of the children who get cancer in China should never get it because it's been from environmental pollution.
Oh, wow. That's huge. And what's interesting is that I teach on China at UH, and one of the topics I talk about is the environment. And the Chinese government didn't want to publish any of these data about how many people die from it, how many people get disease from it. It'd be important to know the effect of these air pollution problems?
Well, I think they do know, and what's more important is that the people know, because
That's right,
you will
yeah.
be reading in the newspapers about communities that have been demonstrating or very unhappy.
That's right, yeah.
Because especially in coal mining areas or where there's other factories, because they are getting cancers and there's a real strain on the healthcare system. And so it is obvious, and you can't hide it. I mean,
That's
you
right.
cannot hide it. It's something the government cannot hide.
That's right,
I
yeah.
mean, if you can't see the building across the street,
That's right.
and you have an overflow of people in ER at the hospitals because they're all having severe respiratory problems,
Wow.
I mean, there's nothing you can hide about that.
You know, here you read about it. You just get the data, and here when you talk about it, it's affecting everybody's daily lives.
It definitely
No
affects
escape
everyone.
for anybody, right?
No, we all carry apps on our iPhones
Oh.
that tell us the pollution levels in any of the cities we want. Of course, I carry 3 major cities,
Okay.
Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, on mine. And it's all there. It's all there on the apps, and both from the U.S. Embassy and the U.S. consulates, as well as the Chinese government.
Oh, wow.
But what's important is that it's not about foreigners or others. It's the Chinese people themselves want to clean up the environment.
I understandably, absolutely, because they are living in
Yes.
that environment. So we're going to take another short break, and I'm Hong Jiang. This is Asia in Review, and we've been talking about daily living in China. When we come back, we'll learn more.
We want to thank our underwriters.
Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric on Maui and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company.
The High-Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism.
Castle in COOKE, Hawaii, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state.
Hawaii Gas, formerly the Gas Company, a proponent of the Liquefied Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future.
Collateral Analytics, a Hawaii-based tech company empowering the real estate industry with greater and faster access to the tools and data they need to make better informed property investment decisions.
I'm Nicole Hori. Thanks so much for joining us on ThinkTech.
I'm Maria Kashem. See you next time.
Hello, we're back. We're live, and this is Asia in Review at ThinkTech Hawaii, and I'm Hong Jiang, your host, and we've been talking with Brenda Foster about the daily living in China. So right before the break, I think your mic didn't quite stay where it's supposed to be. We were talking about, we had a great conversation. If you didn't hear clearly, we're talking about air pollution and how people have to adapt. Nobody can escape from it. And, air filter kind of life, and you have to watch on your iPhone apps to see whether the day is good enough to go out, right?
Right.
That's just amazing. Like I said, we read here about the data, and you are talking about on the ground, how you have to adapt to it, and it's affecting everybody equally. Chinese people really wanted to make that change, and that is totally understandable. Let's get to food. We hear so much also over the years about food poisoning. And do you eat food anywhere in China, or do you have to choose and pick and make sure everything's safe?
I ate food everywhere and anywhere in China, but I was also very careful what I ate. Food and health safety is probably the #1 issue, along with pollution, that is affecting China.
How do you choose in terms of see what's safe to eat?
Well, you eat things that are cooked.
Okay.
You eat things that are very well done. When there's a major issue, like when we had 20,000 pigs who were thrown in the Huangpu River.
That's another thing. That's right in Shanghai.
That was right in Shanghai. I would say for about 4 to 5 months, you couldn't purchase pork anywhere in Shanghai because the government was very active in trying to find out what was the problem with the pigs, if they were diseased, where they were coming from, and then the water, of course, was polluted also. So you couldn't buy pork anywhere unless it was imported from some other country. And so you have to be very careful. We had the same problem the last 5 months that I was there this spring, where we couldn't eat any poultry. The Chinese government literally killed any live poultry. Anything that was of anything of the poultry family was killed. Excuse
wow.
me. And so I think
That
it was
was bird flu? Or something?
avian bird flu.
Okay.
And they didn't want to take a chance.
Okay.
So they went to all the wet markets, they went everywhere, and they slaughtered all the birds. So it was 5 months, I think, without any poultry. No duck, no chicken, any other type of birds that anybody would eat. And then if they found caches of live birds, they also just killed them.
Oh wow, the birds were in trouble.
So the birds were in trouble. Then there have been issues with rice, and so there were problems with the rice and poison contaminants on the rice, and the milk with melamine. The government has taken a very proactive approach to trying to do something about food and health safety. And in fact, we had a conference last May with the head of food safety for all of China. And part of the real problem with this is that what most people may not know is that about 95% of China's food supply chain is from small to medium-sized farmers. So small plots feeding into a larger food supply chain, and they have not been able to guarantee the quality control of that food supply chain. And so it makes it very difficult for them.
And it's very hard to imagine, people actually put poison in food that would affect people's lives, like melamine in milk powder,
Right.
affecting children's lives. So I wonder, whether you have any insight living in China when this happened. In addition to what you said, all these different chain of supplies going in there, I wonder about two things. One is the regulation issue, the problem with the regulation. The other thing is what's the role of the government in there? And the third one is the moral issues,
Right.
people who are doing this.
Number one, on the regulation issues, the regulations exist. The problem in China has been the implementation of the regulations.
Because of the corruption that's going on, right?
Well, it's just people don't want to be responsible and accountable.
That's right.
So you have that, number one. Number two, it's really hard to manage this supply chain. And the people are getting very unhappy with it. So what they're doing, at least those who can afford it, they're buying all foreign food products. I mean, it's a boon in terms of if you're a foreign country and you want to export food products to China. Because what is breaking down in China is the social contract between the people and the Chinese government in terms of being able to care for them. Because when you have no matter what you have, but especially when you have a one-child policy, and we talk about the generic Mrs. Wong, she wants only the best for her one child, and she doesn't want anything to happen to that one child, which is understandable.
That's right.
And so she will buy foreign products. So what you see now for meats is that people are buying Australian beef, for example. They're importing the rice from Japan. They're doing Tetra Pak milks from New Zealand, Australia, and France. And people do not trust that the government has been able to reach far enough into the supply chain to be able to assure them, for example, that melamine is no longer being put in the milk. And that's why you see across the world the run by Chinese parents on wanting to import foreign milk for children. And why you're starting to see quotas in Europe, quotas in Hong Kong, and the rest. And then the third part also of the question, is on the morals of the people that are doing that. When the Chinese government can find who's doing it and prosecuting them, they're actually sentencing them to death, quite frankly. From some of the highest company executives to some of the other more, what I will call entrepreneurial business people. But it is very, very serious in that food supply chain. And it's more serious because of the growing lack of trust that the general populace in China has for believing the Chinese government is really doing something about the situation.
Yeah, I think that's going to that's a very, very major factor. Even though the Chinese government, see this and think it can do something, but the lack of trust. This is another thing about the different Chinas. There's Chinese government, there are Chinese people, and different groups of Chinese people, and the government hasn't really taken care of some of the groups. So therefore, people are not trusting the government and feel that they're left out, and they don't feel that they are given the responsibility or given the rights. So therefore, they are acting irresponsibly in that way.
And you do have a lot of people who are just out to make money, and in some ways they may not understand the severity of what they are doing to tamper with the food products. But we've heard so many stories while we're there, also where people would take expired rolls off the shelves, send them back to the factory, mix them in with other rolls, and put them back on the shelves, kind of a new roll, but they just reuse everything. And whether it's a resource issue, a lack of understanding issue, or a total disregard for public safety and not realizing, it's hard to tell.
That's definitely a major issue, and that gave China a bad rep in terms of how bad people are. And I keep saying these are not really representative of the Chinese people. I mean, if you look at Chinese people, Chinese culture, they're nice people, wonderful culture. And something along the way, things get changed and things get degraded, and we have to look at the whole system.
Right.
Yeah. In terms of food, do you buy things from other countries, import different kind of foods there?
Yes, we do.
What kind?
Meat, especially if we want beef.
Oh, okay.
We would. I did not eat any fish because the fish were so polluted with antibiotics. They were in, all the fish, it seemed, were in lakes, and the lakes were polluted, so they, people who were farming the fish put lots of antibiotics in the water so that they were in the fish. So I did not eat the fish. Milk we did use after the melamine issue. We stopped buying Chinese milk, and so for the last several years we only bought milk in Tetra Paks, and we did buy Japanese rice.
Was it more expensive to buy the imported foods?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
What about the people you come to contact with? Were they, I suppose some of them were able to afford to buy imported foods, some of them don't?
Oh, there is a large growing middle class in China, and it really is the Chinese who are the largest buyers of imported food. It's not the expatriate or expat community per se. It definitely is. But did we eat out at Chinese restaurants and do everything? Absolutely we did. And yes, I got food poisoning a couple times, but I will say the food poisoning actually was not on Chinese food. It was on Western food.
Oh, wow.
So we were very lucky. But you go out, you experience it. I mean, you do what you need to do to live and to adapt, because that's what you do.
This is part of trade-off you're talking about,
it's
right?
part of the trade-off for me there.
And otherwise you can't shut yourself in the house all the time.
No, and I had excellent Chinese food.
I
in a lot of, and some very very favorite restaurants that aren't very fancy, but just great food, great restaurants, and was very happy with them all.
That's great. Anything else you want to talk about food, because we can keep going?
Well, may I add something on that? What
Please
you're
do.
seeing because of the lack of trust in China is a growing interest, and the Chinese are doing this themselves, of organic food in China. So there's a lot of organic farmers coming up, and I think we're seeing a lot more of aquaponics also. And we're also seeing that people are taking their own plots of land. Now in their apartments, they're putting in little plots. In housing, we saw in areas where they decided not to have grass anymore or trees, and they've all they've all ripped up the grass and they're starting to grow their own food again because they don't trust the food supply.
That's interesting. If you look at organic food in the market, I wonder about certification process. Is that in place to make sure that what you buy is organic?
That's a very good question. One would hope it is. I actually saw a very interesting documentary on a woman CEO who has a very large certified organic farm, actually up in the Qingdao area and up in Shandong. But I am sure, being an entrepreneurial society, there may well be people who are saying their food is organic and really isn't. So what we see in the major hotels, both Chinese and foreign-owned hotels, that they are constantly buying good products that are grown and good agricultural products grown in China, but they're going out weekly to check the supply chains, check where everything's being grown, what the processing of that food is. So it is a very intensive system that if you're bringing food in or you're responsible for serving some sort of food for the public.
That's understandable. That's right. And I noticed you use the word entrepreneur very politely, in a very, very polite way. Understand. Okay, we're going to take another break. And this is Hong Jiang at Asia in Review. And we've been talking about daily living in China. When we come back, we'll learn more.
I'm Bill Spencer, President of the Hawaii Venture Capital Association. We do monthly luncheon programs with ThinkTech about things that matter to Hawaii entrepreneurs, investors, and business service providers. So join us on the fourth Thursday of every month at the Plaza Club. For information about upcoming events or to join our mailing list, visit hvca.org. See you there.
Hi, this is Jay Fidel of ThinkTech. You know, we have some great shows during the business week. We broadcast 2 or 3 times every afternoon between 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock. I just want to mention also that we have a new show. This is The Arts of Life with Willow Chang. Check it out at 2 to 3 p.m. every Friday. Aloha. This is Jay Fidel.
Hello, we're back. We're live. This is Asia in Review at ThinkTech Hawaii, and I'm Hong Jiang, and I've been speaking with Brenda Foster, past president of American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, and the largest chamber, overseas chamber from the U.S. So we were just talking about the organic food, and people started to produce their own foods.
That is really a growing trend in China. We see it in the cities. We see private little gardens sprouting up. We see aquaponics. And in the larger communities that have grass, we see that everybody's ripping up the grass and they're planting gardens because they really do not trust the food supply chain. And they feel better if that they themselves are growing their own food so they can trust it.
The Chinese culture also has really emphasized food. Food is a very important part of Chinese culture. So this food poisoning and a food safety issue really is another major issue, as you said.
Well, it's also a stability issue for China, because historically, if you look at China, part of the problem historically and for the revolutions in China were the famines that took place and that people had no food to eat. So as governments came in, I mean, the goal was to be able to feed the people. So if now, in today's modern world, you have a government who cannot be trusted to be able to manage a food supply chain, and you have people wanting to be able to eat food again, only in a little different way. I mean, they have the food, but they want to be there. Historically, and then today, history could repeat itself. So I do think food and health safety in China also goes to the stability of the country.
That's a very important point. I have heard somebody were saying that environmental issues, food safety issues could be the factors that really kind of change the whole system in China. You know, if people are, there are a lot of people who are very, very unsatisfied with the government, and whether the government structure will stay, where the Communist Party would have to change, that may be related to these environmental issues and food issues?
I think those are very real issues, and I've read lots of editorials written by Chinese on that same issue. It is, you really want to be able to feed your populace and have them trust that what is being grown and what is, the regulations and the food supply chains, and that the air they breathe is for their benefit, and that the government cares about them enough to make sure that you have clean air, you have clean water, and you can trust your food supply chain.
That's right, yeah. Let's move on to some of the other daily living topics. Let's talk about housing. Shanghai is also notorious for having this high rise in house pricing.
It's a city of 23 to 25 million people, of which I would say maybe 5 million are migrant workers who come in. And the government has been very conscious of the fact of the high rises, and if they're relocating people because they're redoing neighborhoods, that they are indeed moving people into other apartment complexes in which they can live. But it's a major city, and it is a very expensive city to live in. And housing, there's not enough housing actually for everybody who needs it, and that's part of the problem.
There's this housing bubble that's happening in China, overbuilt of housing and very expensive housing. Do you see that in Shanghai in terms of housing being built and too expensive for people to buy?
There is a lot of housing being built. On the housing bubble, there are economists who say, yes, there's a housing bubble, and no, there is not a housing bubble. But you see a lot of apartment complexes and the rest that were built in areas that nobody live and work in, and then of course nobody's going to go out into those areas and live. But what has really made a difference in housing, in the 8 years I was living in Shanghai, it has been the development of the transportation system. So when I first got there, there were 2 subways. When I left this summer, there were 14 subways with 2 more coming online, a total of 16 subways, which has opened up land for development, housing that housing people can afford, and it has also opened up a whole new different economic development that has cities and small to medium-sized enterprises, but yet a rapid transit system that can bring people into the city wherever they might be working. So I do think the infrastructure development is what is making a difference in the housing in the Shanghai area and the surrounding areas. And the high-speed trains have made a huge difference, for example, in going to Hangzhou or Nanjing or any of the surrounding areas. So infrastructure and transportation are opening up areas where affordable housing is being built.
In terms of housing, with the transportation, you have housing built out of the major center of the city.
Right.
And there'll be 2 issues. I wonder whether you have, seen any yourself there. One is some people who have houses and they have to be forced to relocate, and some of them are not very happy at all. Some of them cannot afford the new housing. So that's one issue. The other issue is farmers' good farmland were taken away, and there are protests about that. Do you see any of those happening?
In Shanghai, there were issues when they were moving farmers away from the area that the Shanghai or the World Expo for 2010 was being built. And a lot of the farmers were being moved into apartment complexes as opposed to being in their areas where they would farm. There, and also when they were developing the Three Gorges project, we were seeing another huge relocation of people. What is important, and this is where I've seen the documentaries on and seen it somewhat in the countryside, is that if you take a farmer off their family plot of land and you put them into a maybe very nice housing apartment complex, you may have moved them into a nicer place to live, but you have damaged their livelihood.
That's right.
Because they no longer have that plot of land to work for their economic development. So then the issue is, how do you retrain
That's
a
right,
labor
yeah.
force who are used to being farmers and no longer have land to farm? And that has been some of the social issues that they have had to come to grips with, I think, in China. I think there has been, and generally, and reported in the Chinese press, anywhere from 90,000 to 120,000 demonstrations a year throughout China about people wanting to stay on their land. And in some cases, the government relents, and they get to keep their land, and they get to keep farming, and then it just depends what it is. There was a very famous picture of a house sitting in the middle of two major freeways. The person in this house refused to leave, so the government said, okay, you can stay there, and the major freeways now went around in a circle around the house. In the end, they did move. But there's some very sad stories about people committing suicide, setting themselves on fire.
Oh, just bulldozed.
Or things were bulldozed over. But I do think from the demonstrations I've seen on the streets and demonstrations in front of government offices, that the government is far more sensitive now to what is taking place, because they're very sensitive to public opinion, something you haven't seen in years past. And especially with the internet and social media is what is revolutionizing and changing China and changing the way the government responds in situations like this.
Yeah, so they can't just easily cover up things now. People can just, use their cell phone and then put out a message.
Yeah, I think it's almost impossible for the government to cover up anything in China, because there are cell phones, like I think 650 million people have cell phones in China.
By the way, I've been meaning to ask you, did they find out who dumped the pigs? In Shanghai.
Well, what it was is that there were pigs being sold, from what we were told, pigs being sold or pork being sold on a black market. And that when the government decided to clamp down on the black market because they were concerned about diseases with some of the pigs, all of the small farmers around the Huangpu River threw the pigs in the river. The reason is they have very small plots of land. They can't bury the pigs. So they threw them in the river. Some were missing a few feet and a few other things that may well still have been sold. But when the government would go, they could shut down the black market. But in terms of the farmers, they had gotten rid of the pigs.
Oh wow! It's very much it's involving so many people there. Time goes fast, and we're coming to the next just 1-2 minutes left.
Oh my goodness!
Very quick question for people who are about to go to China, thinking about going to China. What advice you have for them?
Go. China is a dynamic and interesting place to live and to experience. But I will say you shouldn't go without doing your due diligence first as to why you want to go, what you want to do. People aren't going to be speaking English with as much English as is spoken in China. You have to be adaptable, you have to be flexible, and you need to do your due diligence and know why you're going there. And if you can afford it, I would go on a trip first, take a look around, and see if China's really going to be for you.
Oh, great. So we have to wrap up now, and I'm Hong Jiang. This is Asia in Review, and we've been talking with Brenda Foster, past president of American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, about daily living in China. And I want to thank our production manager Ian Davidson, and communications director Chrissy Goffigan, and of course our producer Jay Fidel. And I want to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. I'll see you next Tuesday at Asia in Review. Thank you and goodbye.